The first thing anyone ever knew about Judge Henry Whittaker was that he didn't make mistakes, at least, not the kind you could prove. The last thing anyone ever thought about him was that he'd die quietly in his sleep. But Henry didn't die. 5 years ago, he simply stopped. A stroke had knocked him into a coma so deep that even the sharpest voices, doctors, family, old friends shouting at his bedside, calmed, pull him back. Machines had kept him breathing, tubes had kept him fed, and the days had blurred into years. His eyes had never opened. Not once. The man who once ruled courtrooms like a king had been reduced to a fragile body in a beige hospital room, with the monotonous beep of a heart monitor as his only sentence to serve. Until the day she walked in. Her name was Elise Carter, a nurse who'd learned long ago that hospitals were full of ghosts, not the kind that rattled chains, but the kind that lived in bodies, trapped, waiting for something no one could name. She had been working the neurology ward for 7 years, long enough to know the difference between patients you cared for and patients you kept alive. Judge Whittaker was in the latter category. She'd seen his name on the roster before, but she hadn't been assigned to his care until that Tuesday morning. It was raining so hard outside that even the paramedics cursed under their breath. She'd slipped into room 307 to check vitals, clipboard in one hand, coffee in the other, ready to do the usual chart, adjust, leave. And then she saw it. On the nightstand, tucked under a half-empty water bottle and a stack of unopened get-well cards, was an envelope so old its edges had curled inwards. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, the ink faded to a deep brown. Someone had written, "For Henry," in careful cursive. She might have ignored it, but the name scratched something in the back of her memory. She'd grown up in Fayetteville, just like him. She remembered the stories, the trials, the headlines, the way people whispered about him at barbershops and beauty salons. Judge Whittaker, the man who kept the city clean. The man who, as her mother once spat over the dinner table, never saw a black man he didn't think deserved a cell. She should have left it there. She didn't. By noon, she had finished her rounds and returned to room 307. She sat beside him, peeling the envelope open as the sound of rain softened against the window. "Mr. Whittaker," she said quietly, her voice a little uncertain. "I found this letter. Looks like it's been here for a while. I thought, maybe I could read it to you." Of course, there was no answer. His chest rose and fell mechanically. The faint smell of antiseptic hung in the air. She unfolded the paper, surprised at how steady her hands felt. "Henry, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not dead, just gone. Some things in this world are too heavy to carry, even when you wear the robe and hold the gavel. I don't know if you ever thought about what happened in '92. I do. Every day. And I hope, one day, you'll think about it too." Elise's voice faltered. 1992. She wasn't even 10 years old then, but she knew enough about Fayetteville's history to feel her chest tighten. That was the year Marcus Reed, her cousin, had been sentenced to 30 years for a convenience store robbery everyone in the neighborhood swore he didn't commit. She glanced at Whittaker's still face. "You thought you were keeping order. Maybe you believed it. But order isn't justice, Henry. You can't build peace on the bones of the wrong man." The words hit her like a punch. Whoever wrote this knew exactly who Judge Whittaker was and exactly what he had done. Outside, the rain picked up again, sharp against the glass. Elise kept reading, the air between them growing heavier. It wasn't until the third paragraph that she noticed it. A twitch, so small she thought she'd imagined it, but his index finger had moved. Just once. Her pulse spiked. "Mr. Whittaker? Can you hear me?" she whispered, leaning closer. No answer, only the steady beeping. She read on. "You once told me the law is blind. I've spent years wishing you were right. But you weren't blind, Henry. You saw everything. And you chose what to believe." This time, his eyelids fluttered. Elise froze, heart pounding in her throat. In the 7 years she'd worked here, she'd seen comatose patients twitch before random nerve misfires. But this was different. This was deliberate. She kept reading, her voice sharper now, almost defiant. "If there's a God, Henry, I hope he makes you see the faces of the men you buried. I hope you hear their voices when you sleep. And I hope, someday, you find the courage to speak the truth before it's too late." The monitors began to beep faster. His lips parted slightly. And then, impossibly, his right hand moved, fingers curling like they were reaching for something in the air. Elise's breath caught. She dropped the letter onto the bed and grabbed his hand. "It's okay," she said, her voice trembling now. I'm here. I'm listening. His eyelids opened slow, uncertain, as if each millimeter cost him a year of his life. His eyes were pale blue, watery with age and something else she couldn't name. When he finally spoke, his voice was a cracked whisper. Who are you? She could have said, your nurse. She could have said nobody. Instead, she tightened her grip and said, I'm Elise Carter, Marcus Reed's cousin. The name hit him like a slap. His breathing quickened, eyes flickering with recognition and guilt. Outside, the rain turned to thunder, and for the first time in 5 years, Judge Henry Whitaker was awake. Henry's lips trembled, but no sound came out at first. His chest heaved, the shallow breath of a man whose body had been still for far too long. Elise didn't move her hand from his. She wanted him to know this wasn't just a nurse's duty, it was personal. His voice cracked, and he swallowed hard, as though the very act of speaking was foreign after half a decade. Marcus Reed. Her jaw tightened. You remember him. I remember. Everything. His eyes drifted past her shoulder to the rain-streaked window, where a tree swayed in the wind. It was a long time ago. Not long enough for my family, she said, her tone sharpening. Not long enough for Marcus, either. He's still in prison. 28 years now. For something he didn't do. Henry blinked slowly, and Elise could almost see the memories forming behind his pale irises. She imagined them like a courtroom replay, the details sharp, the verdict irreversible. You don't know. I know enough, she cut in. I know he was 19. I know he was working double shifts at the grocery store. I know the robbery happened while he was halfway across town. And I know you didn't care. A flicker of pain or maybe shame crossed his face. The evidence was garbage, Elise snapped. Witnesses were pressured. The defense attorney was underqualified. You wanted a conviction, and you got one. That's all you cared about. Henry's breathing grew uneven. His gaze dropped to their joined hands. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence like a metronome marking time they didn't have. Finally, Henry whispered, I did care. More than you think. Elise almost laughed at that, the bitterness bubbling up before she could stop it. Caring doesn't look like sending an innocent man to prison. It was different then, he said, voice heavy with something that wasn't quite regret, not yet. The city was angry, scared. They wanted justice fast. And he faltered, as if the truth were a cliff's edge he'd never dared approach before. I gave it to them. You mean you gave them a scapegoat, she said coldly. Henry didn't argue. He closed his eyes, and for a second Elise thought he might slip away again, retreat into the dark place he'd lived for 5 years. But then he spoke, softer this time. The letter. What about it? It's from. His lips twitched, as if forming the name cost him. William Avery. My clerk. Back then. Elise's eyes widened. The one who disappeared? She remembered the rumors how Avery had quit the courthouse suddenly and left town without a trace. Henry gave the barest nod. He knew. About the trial. About what I ignored. Her pulse quickened. So he tried to warn you? Or expose you? Both. The rain battered the window harder now, and a low rumble of thunder rolled through the room. Elise's mind was racing. The letter wasn't just a personal confession, it was evidence. Why was it sitting there for 5 years? She demanded. If it mattered that much, I didn't open it, Henry said, his voice so frail it was almost lost under the rain. Elise stared at him, disbelief flooding her. You mean to tell me you had this letter from the one person who could clear Marcus, and you just left it sealed? He didn't answer right away. The silence was almost unbearable. Finally, he whispered, I was afraid. Her hands tightened into fists. Afraid of what? Losing your spotless record? Your reputation? Afraid, he said slowly, of admitting I was wrong. The words hung in the air like a guilty verdict. For the next hour, Elise pressed him, piecing together fragments of the past from his halting sentences. He told her about the pressure from the mayor's office, the police chief's insistence that Marcus fit the description, the media frenzy after 2 unsolved robberies in the same neighborhood. They wanted it wrapped up, Henry murmured. And Marcus? He was easy to wrap. You knew, Elise said, her voice trembling with fury. You knew, and you still. She couldn't finish the sentence. Henry's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. I told myself I was protecting the city, that a guilty verdict would stop the unrest. But I wasn't protecting anyone. I was protecting me. Elise wanted to walk out right then, leave him with his machines and his guilt. But another part of her she didn't like wanted more. She wanted him to say the words out loud, in full. She wanted him to name Marcus as innocent. Then say it, she challenged. Say you convicted the wrong man. He stared at her, jaw working, as if the sentence were a rusted lock he couldn't quite force open. Finally, I convicted the wrong man. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a start. That night, Elise went home with the letter in her bag. She read it again and again, studying Avery's words. The way each sentence seemed to point towards something bigger, something that could overturn a case. Her brother, Daniel, called her around 10. How's work? He asked. She hesitated. Different. I might have something for Marcus. There was a pause, then the sound of him exhaling sharply. Elise, we've been through this. Lawyers, appeals, petitions, it never goes anywhere. This is different, she insisted. It's from a court insider. He names names. If we can track him down, track him down. Daniel's voice rose. Elise, he's been gone almost 30 years. He could be dead. And even if he's not, you think the system's just gonna roll over because some old judge woke up and decided to grow a conscience? Her grip on the phone tightened. Maybe not. But I can't just let it sit there. I can't. Daniel sighed, long and weary. You sound like Mom did, before she got sick. Always believing the truth was enough. Be careful, Elise. Truth doesn't set people free, it gets them hurt. She didn't answer. The next morning, she was back in room 307, coffee in hand. Henry was awake again, staring at the ceiling. I thought you wouldn't come back, he said hoarsely. I'm not here for you, she replied, setting the coffee down. I'm here for Marcus. Something in his eyes softened almost relief. I can help. Then help, she said, pulling out the letter. Where's Avery now? Henry shook his head. I don't know. Last I heard, he left for Chicago. Changed his name, maybe. He was scared too. Elise leaned closer. If you signed an affidavit, admitted the trial was flawed, they'll say I'm confused, Henry interrupted. A sick old man trying to rewrite history. But Avery, if he speaks, then we find him, she said firmly. Henry looked at her for a long time, as though weighing something heavy. Finally, he whispered, there's a file. Hidden. My chambers. Second drawer on the left, false bottom. It's all their police memos, witness statements. Things that never made it to trial. Her heart pounded. You kept them? I thought. Maybe one day. He trailed off. Elise almost didn't want to believe him, but if it was true, those papers could be enough to reopen the case. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because, he said, you're the only one who would do something with it. She stared at him. For the first time, she wondered if this wasn't just guilt, it was a man trying, in the last chapter of his life, to balance the scales he'd tipped so far out of line. The rest of the day blurred. Elise finished her shift, then drove to the courthouse. The building was half empty, its marble halls echoing under her footsteps. She knew someone in maintenance, a childhood friend named Terrence, who still had keys to the old chambers. You're lucky I like you, he muttered as he unlocked the heavy oak door. You get caught in here, I don't know you. The room smelled of dust and paper. Elise went straight to the desk, found the second drawer, and felt along the bottom until her fingers caught on a thin lip of wood. She lifted it, revealing a stack of manila folders. Her hands shook as she opened the first one. Inside were typed statements, police reports with sections blacked out, and photos of Marcus's eyes wide with confusion standing against a wall while an officer pointed at him. The more she read, the more her stomach turned. Witness descriptions didn't match Marcus at all. Timelines contradicted each other. A confession from another suspect, one who later recanted, was buried at the bottom. It was enough. More than enough. She stuffed the files into her bag and slipped out the back door. When she returned to the hospital, Henry was asleep again, but his hand twitched when she placed hers over it. I found it, she whispered. You were telling the truth. His lips moved faintly. Good. Elise sat back, heart racing. She didn't know what the next step was, lawyers, media, maybe both, but she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And somewhere, miles away, Marcus Reed was still behind bars, not knowing that for the first time in nearly 3 decades, the walls around his case had started to crack. The following morning, Elise's apartment felt different. She hadn't slept much, her mind looping through scenarios. Lawyers who'd laugh her out of the office, prosecutors who'd bury the evidence, Marcus's face if she failed him again. She brewed coffee, staring at the courthouse files spread across her kitchen table. Each page was a woundsome raw, some scarred over but all still bleeding. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Don't do anything stupid. She didn't reply. Instead, she slid the files into a backpack and headed for the one person she thought might listen, attorney Lisa Moretti. Moretti's office was cramped, walls lined with law books and framed photos of protest marches. She looked up from her desk as Elise entered. "Elise Carter," she said, eyebrows rising. "Haven't seen you since your brother's custody hearing. What brings you in?" Elise set the backpack on the desk. "Evidence. From Marcus Reed's trial. Stuff the court never saw." Moretti's expression shifted from polite curiosity to wary interest. "Where did you get this?" Elise hesitated. "From someone who was there. Someone who knew what happened." "That's vague," Moretti said, but she opened the folder anyway. Her eyes skimmed the pages, lips tightening as she read. "These witness statements shall. This memo from the police chief, these were suppressed. This is a Brady violation." "Which means?" "It means if this is authentic, Marcus has a shot. A real one." Elise's pulse quickened. "Then we file an appeal?" Moretti leaned back, exhaling. "It's not that simple. We'll need to verify everything: chain of custody, original signatures. And we'll need someone to testify where this came from." Elise swallowed. "Henry Whitaker will." The lawyer's eyes widened. "The judge? That judge? He's awake," Elise said. "He admitted Marcus was innocent." Moretti's mouth opened, then closed. "If that's true, and if he's willing to sign an affidavit, we could blow this wide open. But you realize the DA's office will fight like hell. They'll call it a stunt. They'll try to discredit him." "I don't care," Elise said. "I just want Marcus out." Moretti tapped a pen against her desk. "Then we start now. You give me that affidavit. I'll line up a forensic doc to authenticate these papers. And, Elise," she fixed her with a steady look, "be careful who you tell. Evidence like this has a way of disappearing." Back at the hospital, Henry looked smaller, paler than the day before. But when Elise mentioned the affidavit, something sparked in his eyes. "I'll sign it," he said without hesitation. "I'll say everything. How the evidence was buried. How the police leaned on witnesses. How his voice cracked. How I let it happen." Elise pulled out a notepad. "We can get a notary here. Moretti will handle the rest." But before she could leave, Henry's hand clamped weakly around hers. "Elise, they won't let this go quietly." "I know," she said. "No," he insisted, his voice hoarse but urgent. "You don't. There are people who built their careers on this case. If it falls apart, so do they. They'll protect themselves no matter what it costs you." Her stomach tightened. "Let them try." He studied her face for a long moment. "You remind me of Avery. Same fire. I hope you burn them down." By Thursday, the affidavit was signed, notarized, and locked in Moretti's office safe. The lawyer had already reached out to the Innocence Project and a local journalist she trusted. But word traveled fast in Fayetteville. Too fast. Elise noticed the car, first a black sedan, parked across from her apartment 2 nights in a row. The same shadowed figure in the driver's seat, never getting out. Then came the phone call. "No caller ID. You need to stop," a male voice said. Calm, almost polite. "Walk away from the Reed case." Elise's grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" "A friend," the voice said. "One who knows you have a career to lose. Maybe more." She hung up without answering, her hands shaking. "At the hospital," she told Henry. His jaw clenched. "They're watching you." "I told you, I'm not backing down," she said. His pale eyes held hers. "Then you'd better be ready for the storm." The storm came faster than she expected. 2 days later, the hospital's HR director called her in. "Elise," the woman said, her tone artificially sweet, "we've had a complaint about your conduct with a patient." "What complaint?" Elise demanded. "Interference. Taking personal property from his room. Reading private correspondence without authorization." Elise's mouth went dry. "Are you serious?" "He asked me to read it." The director's smile was thin. "Regardless, you're on administrative leave pending investigation." It was a message, clear as day. "Stop." She called Moretti from the parking lot, pacing under a flickering street lamp. "They're trying to sideline me," Elise said. "Then let them," Moretti replied. "You've already done what you needed to get the affidavit, the files. Let me handle the rest." Elise hesitated. Every instinct screamed to stay close, to guard Henry. to make sure the evidence didn't vanish. But she also knew Moretti was right. Fine, she said. But you keep me in the loop. The next week was a blur of meetings and late-night phone calls. The Innocence Project agreed to take Marcus's case. The journalist Maya Torres dug into the old trial records, publishing an online expose that spread like wildfire. The headline read, "Judge breaks silence on wrongful conviction after 30 years." Within hours, Elise's phone was buzzing with messages from people she'd never met, some thanking her, others accusing her of destroying the city's law and order. But the most chilling was a short, anonymous text. "Hope you like living alone." 3 days later, Henry's condition worsened. Elise rushed to the hospital despite her suspension, flashing her badge at security and daring them to stop her. He was awake, but struggling, his breath shallow. "They'll try to stall," he rasped. "Keep Marcus in. As long as they can." "I know," she said, sitting beside him. "But the truth's out now. They can't bury it again." He gave her a faint, almost proud smile. "Maybe not. But they can bury me." Before she could respond, his monitors beeped wildly. Nurses swarmed the room. Elise was pushed back as they worked, shouting orders, but Henry's gaze never left hers. And then, just before they wheeled him toward the ICU, he mouthed 2 words she would never forget: "Find Avery." That night, Elise sat in her darkened apartment, laptop open to a decades-old news archive. She scrolled through everything she could find on William Avery. Graduated top of his class, clerked for Whitaker, vanished in late 1993. It took hours, but she found something: a real estate deed from Chicago, signed by a William Arlen. The signature slanted, deliberate, looked eerily like Avery's. She sent it to Moretti. Her phone rang 5 minutes later. "That's him," Moretti said. "If we can get him to testify, it's game over." Elise closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, hope felt real. The next step would be dangerous. If Avery had stayed hidden this long, there was a reason. But if she found him, if she convinced him to speak, Marcus Reed might finally walk free. And as she stared out at the rain-slicked streets of Fayetteville, Elise knew there was no turning back. Chicago was colder than Elise remembered. The wind off Lake Michigan cut straight through her coat, but she barely noticed. She had an address: an aging apartment building in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where tenants kept to themselves. The name on the buzzer read W. Arlen. She pressed it once, twice. No answer. She was about to turn away when a man's voice called from behind her. "You're looking for someone." She turned. A tall, thin man in his late 50s stood by the curb, grocery bag in hand. His hair was salt and pepper, his coat frayed at the sleeves. His eyes, though, were sharp, watchful. "William Avery?" she asked. The man froze. "You have the wrong person." "No, I don't," Elise said. "I'm here about Marcus Reed." His jaw tightened. He glanced up and down the street, then nodded toward the building. Inside. Now. His apartment was small, cluttered with books and yellowing papers. He set the groceries down and gestured for her to sit. "Do you have any idea how long I've stayed off the radar?" he said. "I do," Elise replied. "And I know why. But Marcus doesn't have that luxury. He's still in prison. You can help get him out." Avery sank into a chair. "I tried back then. I wrote Henry. I told him I'd go public. Then the threats started, calls in the night, men following me. I left Fayetteville and never looked back." "He's awake," Elise said. "Henry. He signed an affidavit admitting the conviction was wrong. But the DA's fighting it. They'll win unless you testify." Avery's eyes narrowed. "If I come forward, they'll come after me again." "Maybe," Elise said. "But if you stay silent, Marcus dies in there. 30 years for a crime he didn't commit because people who knew the truth were too scared to speak." The words hung in the air. Avery looked away, staring at a crack in the wall. "Finally," he said, "if Henry's willing to go on record, so am I." 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed. The air buzzed with tension, journalists in the back, Marcus's family in the front, and a row of grim-faced prosecutors at the state's table. Marcus himself sat beside Moretti, his hair now streaked with gray, his hands folded tightly in front of him. Elise sat directly behind him. She hadn't seen him since she was a teenager, but she recognized him instantly. His shoulders were broader, his face more lined, but his eyes steady, unbroken, were the same. The judge presiding was not Henry Whitaker. Henry sat in a wheelchair at the side of the courtroom, pale but alert. An oxygen tube ran beneath his nose, but his gaze was steady. The hearing began with Moretti submitting the affidavit and suppressed evidence. Then Avery took the stand. His testimony was meticulous dates, conversations, memos. He named the officers who'd pressured witnesses, the meetings where Henry had been told to make it stick. The prosecutors objected repeatedly, but the judge overruled them each time. Then it was Henry's turn. A hush fell as the bailiff wheeled him forward. He took the oath with a trembling hand. "I failed," Henry said into the microphone, his voice rough but clear. "I failed Marcus Reed. I failed the oath I swore. I allowed fear, politics, and prejudice to outweigh the evidence. And I am here to say before this court, before God, that Marcus Reed is innocent." Gasps rippled through the room. Elise felt her throat tighten. The prosecutor tried to paint Henry as a confused old man, but his answers were steady. When pressed on why he hadn't spoken sooner, he looked straight at Marcus. "Because I was a coward," he said. "And because no one made me face the truth until Nurse Elise Carter read me a letter I'd been too afraid to open." I turned to Elise. She kept her gaze on Marcus. The hearing stretched over 2 days. On the afternoon of the second day, the judge delivered her ruling. This court finds that the conviction of Marcus Reed was secured through the suppression of exculpatory evidence and the violation of his constitutional rights. The conviction is vacated. Mr. Reed is to be released immediately. The room erupted. Marcus's mother sobbed into her hands. Daniel gripped Elise's shoulder, his eyes wet. Marcus turned in his seat, meeting Elise's gaze. He mouthed, "Thank you." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Elise stayed back, letting Marcus have the moment. Cameras flashed as he stepped to the podium, speaking of freedom, of lost years, of the fight still ahead for others like him. Henry's wheelchair was rolled up beside him. When a reporter asked why he'd come forward, Henry's answer was simple. "Because it was the only right thing left for me to do." That night, Elise visited Henry in the hospital. His condition had worsened since the hearing. "You did it," she said softly. "No," he murmured. "We did. Avery, Moretti, you." "Marcus." She hesitated. "Do you regret it?" "Speaking out." He closed his eyes. "I regret waiting so long. But today, I think I finally passed the right sentence." Henry passed away 3 days later. His funeral was small, attended by a few former colleagues, some who still looked at Elise with thinly veiled suspicion. Marcus came, standing silently at the back, his hat in his hands. After the service, he approached Elise. "I can't give you back what you risked," he said. "But I can promise you this: I am gonna live free. For me. For you. For all the years they tried to steal." She nodded, unable to speak. Weeks later, Elise returned to room 307. The bed was empty, the machines gone. She sat by the window, the winter sun casting long shadows across the floor. From her bag, she pulled the letter, the same faded envelope that had started it all. She unfolded it, her eyes tracing the words again. This time, she didn't stop at the last sentence. On the back, in faint ink, Avery had written a single line, almost as if it were meant for the future. "Justice sleeps, but it always dreams." Elise smiled faintly. Outside, snow began to fall. And somewhere in the city, Marcus Reed took his first steps into a life he had waited nearly 30 years to begin. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.